Good morning, my friend. I'm not a good speaker, really. Just I will share my knowledge and experience, and I will give you just some examples about the role of media in religious and political violence. I had chatted with many of you since Thursday evening, and I found many of you have very good knowledge about politics, media, and the developments in Bangladesh. So I should not actually elaborate anything about the background history, political history of Bangladesh, because many of you are aware of it actually. But before sharing the examples about the role of the media in religious and political violence, I should let you know that Bangladesh's politics actually divided in two ideologies. One is secular ideology, another is communal ideology. So this division actually influenced our media. So we have same division in media. But I would say our mainstream print media is very vibrant, and nowadays we have very vibrant broadcast media too. But we have some newspapers. These are actually represent the communal political belief or the communal political parties. But the mainstream media are very secular, and they take very strong stand when there is any political violence and religious violence. So sometimes this is actually a very complex issue when there is any violence. It is communal violence or political violence, because we see two opposite coverage in media, because the newspapers or the TV channels, those represents communal political parties, so they cover from their perspective. But the secular newspapers and the TV channel actually, when they cover the same issue, so they have their different perspectives. So we see actually two opposite sides of the coverage in the newspapers and the TV channels. So I would like to mention one example from 1990. At that time, there was still this newspaper actually exists, but it was highest circulated daily among the communal newspapers. The name is Inqilab. So they were largely blamed for inciting communal violence in 1990. And they published false report that Babri Mosque was destroyed in India. And the Hindus in Dhaka city, they distributed sweets among them after the destruction of the Babri Mosque. So after publishing the story, there was actually attack on Hindus by the group of fanatic Muslims. So you see the role of communal media in Bangladesh. Just I gave you one example from 1990. But besides, I told you that we have very vibrant secular newspapers and TV channels. So we had actually political violence throughout the year in 2014, and just before election in January, and we had religious violence in January after the election. So religious violence means mainly attack on Hindus, the minority, by the group of Islamic fanatics. So what actually I mean that right now in Bangladesh we have around 8 to 9% Hindu population, but it's more than 20 in 1971. So what happened due to attacks on Hindus, many of them actually had to leave our country. So it happened because of two reasons. One is the result of communal politics, and another one is to grab their land. So now the role of the media, I would like to say, I told you that largely it's divided, but the secular media has very strong influence. But the communal newspapers, they have less influence, but they are so organized and they are backed by the communal political parties. Sometimes they are funded by them, and so that's why they implement their agendas. So if I give you some examples, that's how the two types of media, one is communal media and one is very secular, vibrant media, how covered same political violence or religious violence in two different ways. We have actually, you know, the Bangladesh was born in 1971 as a secular democratic country. But we had military rule for 15 years between 1975 and 1990. And military rulers, they basically allowed communal politics in Bangladesh, the religion-based politics, which was banned after the liberation of our country. So they tried to change culturally the whole country, right? It's an Islamization, radicalization. So that's why this long 15 years, the military rulers, they control media. So at that time, we were actually under pressure. So I was not journalist at the time, but I'm just sharing knowledge briefly. So the media actually could not play a very vibrant role at the time. And at the time, the number of newspaper was very less as 4 or 5. But now we have actually it's a dozens of newspapers, but the leading is, I think, it's around 15. It's English language and Bangla language newspapers. So I want to give you just a few examples from last year. Because last year throughout the year there was a violence. It's a religious violence and political violence. Many of you actually know the name of our party. The two major parties actually dominate our politics in the country. One is Awami League and one is BNP. And the Awami League historically known as secular party. And the BNP, this party actually was born in late 70s after the liberation. But unfortunately, this party actually known for patronizing communal politics, patronizing the radical Islamic militants. But this party, the two parties actually shares almost similar number of votes in the country. And they alter the power. So the Hifazat-e-Islam actually is one of the new communal organization in our country. They had a couple of rallies in Dhaka last year. So I want to give you a few examples from the coverage of this rally, of these two rallies. During the Hifazat-e-Islam, when they had one rally in May, so it was actually a havoc for the people in the capital because they orchestrated violence. They destroyed many of our public and private properties in the capital. And they had a clash with police. And more than a dozen people were killed in the capital at that day. But you see our communal newspapers, they blame for this violence, they blame the government for this violence actually. But the secular newspapers, the next day when they reported, they blame the radical Hifazat-e-Islam. So that when we went through the coverage of the both types of newspapers, so we saw the totally two different reporting, right? So one group, the communal newspapers, they were supporting Hifazat-e-Islam. And the secular newspapers, I would say they tried to do the proper reporting, right? So they reported the role of police, what they did. They reported the role of Hifazat-e-Islam, what they did. But the communal newspapers, they just avoided the Hifazat's atrocities in the capital. So I'd like to say, I want to read few paragraphs about the activities of Hifazat-e-Islam when they had a rally on May 5 last year. This radical group, Hifazat, in the name of holding peaceful rally at a place named Shapla Chottor in the capital Dhaka, orchestrated unprecedented anarchy and destroyed, vandalized, and torched public and private properties and used the central mosque to launch their attack on police. Bangladesh's largest circulated Bangla newspaper, Prothom Alo, published a front page report titled 8 Hours of Destruction in the Capital. Let me share a few lines of the report. Quote, Hifazat-e-Islam Bangladesh carried out destruction in the capital in the name of the blockade, in the name of Dhaka blockade. They ransacked, attacked, and set on fire about 2 kilometers of area for about 8 hours. During this time, they blast of thousands of bullets, bomb, cocktails, tear gas, and gas grenades echoed through the entire area. 10 people, including policemen, reportedly died from the clashes, with about 200 injured, unquote. In a follow-up report on this issue, published in the same newspaper, the headline was, quote, many businessmen turned penniless from destruction by Hifazat. So this is just one example from the leading secular newspaper. Now I would like to give you one example from a communal newspaper, right? On the other hand, the report published by another Bangla newspaper named Amar Desh. It's funded and operated by the then opposition party BNP. BNP was opposition between 2001 and 6. So on the same day, on the same mayhem, their reporting was just opposite. The headline of this newspaper was, the Shapla Chottor is floating in the blood of Alems. You know the Alems is the Islamic leaders. Hifazat activists left after drive the joint force, unquote. The first few lines of this report was, the Shapla Chottor, name of the place, it's a quote, is floating in the blood of Alems. Fresh blood is still flowing like water over the black pitch of the road, where the joint forces of the fascist Awami League government carried out killing spree on the unarmed Alim Ulama, Islamic leaders and scholars. It could not be known immediately how many died or got injured in this annihilation, which from 2:30 a.m. at night and continued till dawn. Their blood had created fountain of the blood of many places. So yes, you see the language, presentation, headlines of the two different newspapers. One represent communal views and one represent secular spirit. Naya Digonti is another communal newspaper funded by Jamaat-e-Islami leaders. Many of you actually know the name of Jamaat-e-Islami, right? So Jamaat-e-Islami is one of the largest religion-based political party. So it's an Islamic political party, but their interpretation about Islam is not the real one actually. They have their self-interpretation about Islam. So it's a distorted interpretation. So this newspaper, Naya Digonto, naturally they took side of Hifazat-e-Islam by publishing news and editorial in support of the radical group and taking stance against the government. There is another, the communal parties, mainly Bangladesh's Nationalist Party, in short of BNP and Jamaat-e-Islami, and their allies, openly supported radical Hifazat-e-Islam as they wanted to use them to topple the Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina's government. So, the BNP and their alliance, they actually nurtured the communal politics in Bangladesh. So, Amar Desh, Naya Digonto, these are Bangla newspaper. There is another Bangla newspaper called Shangram. So, Shangram actually is a mouthpiece of Jamaat-e-Islam. So, they also supported the Hifazat-e-Islam's activities and rallies and everything. So, after when they failed to topple the government using Hifazat's rally, they started to spread a rumor using these newspapers that the government killed around 3,000 people in the street at the night when they washed out these all radicals from the road of the capital at the night time. So it created huge controversy in Bangladesh and outside the Bangladesh because the international human rights groups, even some human rights groups in our country, there is question about the drive of the law enforcement agency at the night time to wash out the Hifazat men from the capital. So you see, I would like to say another Bangla newspaper named Kaler Kontho, they actually did an investigation. They published one story after 6 months of the mayhem. And they say none was killed in this operation. But before that story, there was a huge controversy and huge pressure from abroad on the government to make it clear how many people actually was killed. But you see, they actually sprayed the rumor and propaganda using the daily newspaper funded by them, patronized by them. So this is the role of the communal newspaper. But among the secular newspapers, the one newspaper actually did investigate a story about this controversy, and they draw a conclusion that helped to tackle the whole rumor and the propaganda. So if we look at the headline of the editorials on the Hifazat-e-Islam's rally and atrocities in different newspapers, we will find opposite role of the newspapers. Islamic fundamentalist Jamaat-e-Islam's mouthpiece, the daily Shangram, wrote in its editorial, the headline, the title of the editorial was Cruelty on the Hifazat. Pro-BNP daily Amar Desh's editorial headline was, it reminded people of the dark night of 1971. Government carried out brutal mass killing. On the other hand, largest circulated English language daily newspaper, the Daily Star, reports on Hifazat rally was, the title was, quote, Hifazat strikes terror, unquote. In its editorial headline, the paper said, quote, Hifazat barbarity, shocking and condemnable, unquote. Another leading national English language newspaper, our paper, the Dhaka Tribune, published editorial with the title, Let calm heads prevail. Hifazat has done itself no favors with its violence and incendiary rhetoric against the government. The most popular newspaper, Pratham Alu's editorial headline was "Maintain peace, all sides have to keep patience." And the next day's editorial headline was "Loss of life and destruction has to stop, peace and discipline must be maintained." So you see that the editorial policy of the newspapers, right? The communal newspapers, so they are saying the cruelty on Hifazat, right? They were comparing the whole violence with the genocide and mass killing committed in 1971 by the Pakistani occupational force and their collaborators in Bangladesh. But they did not say anything about the atrocities committed by the Hifazat, right? So they took side of them. Similarly, other secular newspapers and TV channels strongly criticized the atrocities committed by the fanatic group Hifazat-e-Islam. But the Digonto television and Islamic TV, we have two actually, the communal TV channels. Also, but now these are actually, the government stopped the broadcast of this TV channel. They were actually covering these events in live. They had actually live coverage. They were actually inciting, because the people across the country was watching the event actually as they had a live coverage. So this whole thing actually, the way they were covering the event, so they were inciting violence across the country, because the whole aim was, if they can actually spread anarchy all over the country, so it will help the main opposition to topple the government. So you see the opposition party who are practicing democratic politics, how they use radical groups for their own political purpose or own political gain. As a reporter, I know how BNP and Jamaat Islami activists who were assigned to commit. Okay, before the election, I would like to say, before the election in January, we had political violence, means we had very targeted, orchestrated attack on the ordinary people in the capital and outside the capital. And these all atrocities actually committed by the party men of the then opposition BNP and Jamaat alliance, right? And their men were assigned to commit arson in passenger buses in the capital city, to kill people who used to call some TV reporters and cameramen to come to the spot before torching the vehicles. Sometimes they used to record the footage themselves and send it to different media houses. The attackers' goal was to ensure broadcast of detailed footage of the brutal attacks and its horrific aftermath of burning passengers, to create panic across the country and to prove the country is in anarchy and nothing is under control of the authority. Some TV channels responded to those calls and publicized rare, shocking footages of torching vehicles. Usually some professional mainstream newspapers of the country prefer not to print picture of a horrific death of injury of people, but this time they made an exception to this policy, as they thought it would be wise to let readers know how brutal opposition can get for their political gain. For example, Bangladesh's English newspaper, the Daily Star, in last November, 7 weeks before the national election, published a report on horrific political violence with the headline, "In the name of politics, brutality beyond belief. 2 kids, CNG driver left to cling on to their lives and mindless hotel pickets set vehicles on fire." They published a frightening picture of a burned person giving an explanation, quote, "Usually we don't publish gory images, But today, we are carrying this photo to stress how people fall prey to mindless political violence in our streets. Unquote. So just you see, sometimes the mainstream newspaper, they take strong stance against the political violence and the religious violence. Even they publish editorial, even the editors, they write commentary to stop this violence actually, if it is religious violence or it is political violence. For example, when we had actually attacks on Hindus after the January 5 election this year, the major professional newspaper took an editorial stance against the repression on Hindu community. The Daily Star prominently brought the issue under spotlight, publishing a front page story under the headline, quote, "Terror on Hindus. BNP Jamaat men vandalized 130 houses, burned 10, unquote. Another respected English daily also played a significant role to expose details about the atrocities on Hindus community in different regions of the country after the election by sending its senior correspondent from the head office Dhaka to the rural area. And they also took the editorial stance against the violence. So there are some other examples actually almost similar. So mainly the media is divided, right? But the one positive thing is the leading major newspapers and TV channels, they are secular. They are very vibrant and strong, and we have very vibrant civil society. So they always take stance against the religious and the political violence. But the problem is the communal and the religious violence is patronized by the political groups and the media. Some of the newspapers and TV channels are funded or patronized by them. So they actually play a role to implement their agendas. So this is the basic problem. You see that one journalist from Nepal yesterday said there is a Hinduism actually growing culturally, but not politically. So the politics and the cultural religious belief actually is separate. But in Bangladesh, the politics use Islam and the religion, and they patronize Islamic militancy, terrorism, and the communal politics. So that's the main problem, and the media is also divided and influenced by this dirty politics. That's the big problem in media too. So we don't know actually the solution of it, but what we believe that these communal groups, for many years, they tried to change the Bangladesh culture, secular Bangladesh culturally, right? Through Islamization, through radicalization, and the rise of Islamic militants is a new phenomenon. So we had dozens of terror attacks by the Islamic militants. So the problem is, you know, that both the major party, when they were in power, they are blamed for bad governance, corruption, for many irregularities. But the major dilemma is one party support communal politics and another party are committed to the secular spirit. So always the nation or the people need to choose better among the worst. That's the challenge. So we need to, if we can correct our politics, then our media, the problem in the media will be corrected automatically actually. So we need to strengthen our democracy. We need to ensure secular spirit in the society. And then we can change the problem in our broadcast and the print media, because the politics usually influence our media. Thank you.